In section 8, we're going to be talking about how the body regulates blood pressure. So blood pressure isn't just a number that you get when you go to the doctor. It's a constantly monitored and adjusted system that helps our body make sure that we get enough oxygen and nutrients to all of the tissues in our body. So to keep our blood pressure in a healthy range, we have several major systems that are working together. Most importantly are going to be our heart and our blood vessels, which we're talking about, but also our kidneys. And then on top of our kidneys, we also have our brain, especially our medulla, that's going to come in and help coordinate these responses. So there's three main factors that determine blood pressure. It's going to be cardiac output, peripheral resistance, and blood volume. And these are going to kind of work collectively. So just as a reminder, when we're talking about cardiac output, that was how much blood your heart was pumping per minute. Peripheral resistance is how hard it is for the blood to flow through vessels. So that narrow straw versus the thicker straw, wider straw with the milkshake. And then blood volume is how much blood you actually have circulating. So if any of those increase, blood pressure is also going to increase. So here they're just showing you some equations. Again, the equations are not meant for you to go in and memorize these. It's for you to understand the relationships. So the first equation is showing you that flow is equal to the change in pressure divided by resistance. Flow is equal to our cardiac output because we're talking about blood flow through the entire circulation. So we're going to substitute cardiac output for flow, and we get the change in pressure divided by resistance is what cardiac output is equal to. And then we're just going to rearrange it. So we rearrange it and we get the change in pressure is equal to cardiac output times resistance. So we've already talked about pressure. We can't just take the average blood pressure that your organs are experiencing. We have to use something called mean arterial pressure. So the mean arterial pressure is going to be our pressure that's in this last equation right here. And your mean arterial pressure, just as a reminder, was your diastolic pressure plus 1/3 of your systolic pressure. So we described mean arterial pressure as cardiac output times resistance, where MAP here, MAP, represents the mean arterial pressure. So essentially the average blood pressure your organs are experiencing. Since cardiac output is equal to stroke volume times heart rate, we talked about that in chapter 18, we can rewrite the formula as mean arterial pressure is equal to stroke volume times heart rate times resistance. So if your stroke volume, if your heart rate or resistance increases, that means that your blood pressure is going to increase. So this is important because, again, your body can change any one of these just to help keep your pressure right where it needs to be for that moment. So for example, stroke volume is going to increase when more blood is being returned to the heart. What they're talking about with more blood being returned to the heart is we're increasing venous return. Also, our heart rate is controlled by neural centers in our brainstem. And resistance, again, that's controlling the blood vessel diameter. So the narrower the vessels are is going to generate more resistance in our blood vessels itself. This is a nice flow chart, and I recommend that you work potentially from the bottom up, understanding things that would increase mean arterial pressure, but also recognize how everything would be reversed if we're talking about lowering mean arterial pressure. So how do we actually adjust our blood pressure? So we have both short-term and long-term mechanisms. Our short-term adjustments are going to come from neural and hormonal controls, and these act very quickly to help keep things stable if you suddenly stand up or if you lose blood. When we talk about long-term control, that's going to come from our kidneys, and that's going to help manage our blood volume over time. Okay, let's talk more about neural controls. And these are fast acting, and a lot of these are going to be reflex based. So your nervous system can rapidly change your blood pressure just by adjusting the size of your blood vessels and also how much blood your heart is actually pumping. So this happens when you have two main neural mechanisms. First would be by changing the diameter of the blood vessels, your body can increase or decrease resistance really, really quickly. So for example, if you suddenly lose a bunch of blood, all of your blood vessels are going to constrict, except for those going to your brain and your heart, because those are your priority. Second, the nervous system can help redistribute blood flow to different organs. We talked about that with regards to exercise, sending more blood to your muscles and less to your digestive system. So these responses are going to be coordinated by reflex arcs that are going to involve your cardiovascular system and your medulla. They're going to involve baroreceptors, chemoreceptors, and input from higher brain centers. So the cardiovascular system is going to include both the cardiac centers, which control your heart rate, and the vasomotor center, which controls your blood vessel diameter. Okay, so more about the role of the cardiovascular center and the reflex arcs. So again, like I mentioned, the cardiovascular center includes both the cardiac centers, which control your heart rate, and the vasomotor center, which is going to control your blood vessel diameter. So the vasomotor center is going to send out pretty much a steady stream of nerve signals that are going to help keep your blood vessels slightly constricted. And this is what we consider a basal level, which we refer to as vasomotor tone. And this tone we can increase or decrease depending on what our body's needs are. So baroreceptors, these are our pressure sensors, specifically sensing the body's blood pressure. So you'll find them in places like the carotid sinuses, aortic arch, and the large arteries in your chest and your neck. When blood pressure rises too much, these receptors are going to send signals to the brain. And then your medulla is going to respond by turning down the vasomotor center, which is responsible for relaxing the blood vessels. So therefore, we're going to slow the heart rate using the cardioinhibitory center and lower our cardiac output. So the end result is that our blood pressure is going to drop. So first, how do we do this really is going to be including vasodilation. And the vasodilation is going to reduce resistance and help shift blood into our veins. So we refer to this as venodilation, which is going to act like a storage reservoir. And it's going to help reduce and lower our venous return and therefore our cardiac output. The second thing that's going to happen is that our cardiac output is going to drop because the heart rate slows down and is pumping with less force. So together, these are going to help stabilize our blood pressure. But what if our blood pressure drops instead? Well, your body's going to flip and our vessels are going to constrict and our heart rate is going to go up and the cardiac output is going to increase. So for instance, this would happen if you stood up really quickly and you feel a little bit dizzy. That's your baroreceptor reflex kicking in to help restore blood flow to your brain. So one limitation of baroreceptors is that they adapt. So if your blood pressure is chronically high, like in the event that you have hypertension, your baroreceptors will actually stop or get used to it and stop responding. So that's why they're not useful for long-term pressure control. And that's why we'll need our kidneys to come into play. So this is just showing you homeostasis, things that we do to help keep our blood pressure within a normal range. You can go in and take a look at this. Okay, so next up we have chemoreceptors. So these are our receptors responsible for monitoring our blood chemistry instead of pressure. They're located in the same general areas as our baroreceptors, and they're going to respond to chemicals. So things like when carbon dioxide levels rise, if our pH drops, meaning that it becomes more acidic, or if our oxygen levels fall. So in these cases, the body's priority is really going to be making sure that we're getting oxygen to the tissues. So the chemoreceptors are going to signal the cardiovascular system to raise or increase our blood pressure. And they do this by speeding up the heart and tightening the vessels and increasing cardiac output, helping push blood towards those tissues who need oxygen, like our brain. So while the reflexes are happening in the brainstem, our higher brain areas like our hypothalamus and our cerebral cortex, they can override or influence what's already going on. So if you've ever gotten really nervous and felt your heart pounding, that's actually your hypothalamus increasing your blood pressure in response to stress. So we can also have these higher brain centers redistribute blood during exercise or in response to temperature changes. So if you've ever felt like you were overheated and need to send more of your blood to your skin to help cool you off. So several hormones are also going to be helpful to help adjust our blood pressure, especially in times of stress or injury. So the adrenal medulla is going to be responsible for secreting epinephrine and norepinephrine. This is going to act to increase your heart rate and cause vasoconstriction. So this is your fight or flight response from your sympathetic nervous system that you learned about in A&P1. We also have angiotensin 2, and this is a really powerful vasoconstrictor, which is going to increase our blood pressure when needed. The third one's going to be ADH, or our antidiuretic hormone, mostly known for keeping water in the body. It's also going to help constrict blood vessels if levels get really high enough. On the flip side, we could have the heart release ANP, or atrial natriuretic peptide. Yes, the heart itself can release its own hormone when the blood volume is too high. So it helps the kidneys excrete salt and water. If we lose salt and water, we're lowering the blood volume and therefore the blood pressure. So the big picture here is we have epinephrine and norepinephrine, angiotensin 2, and ADH. Those are going to be responsible for increasing blood pressure. ANP released by the heart is going to help lower the blood volume and lower the blood pressure. So this is kind of what's showing you what's going on. For now, you don't need to understand the site of action. What I really want you to understand is these hormones listed in this table and what the general effect of the blood pressure is. When we hit the endocrine system, you're going to learn more about the sites of action, where they're being released from, and exactly what they're affecting. Okay, so long-term regulation is really going to be renal regulation. So our kidneys are pretty much going to take over. And it's all about managing our blood volume. So that's why we need our kidneys. Unlike our baroreceptors, our kidneys are not going to adapt to long-term pressure changes. So if the blood pressure stays consistently high or low, the kidneys will adjust how much water we either retain or we lose. So there are two mechanisms. We have the direct renal mechanism and the indirect renal mechanism. So the direct renal mechanism doesn't involve hormones. If the blood pressure is high, the kidneys are just going to send all the extra water that we have into the urine. If our blood pressure is low, they hold on and we retain the water, and that's going to help us increase our blood pressure. So blood pressure is directly correlated to blood volume. So that's how our kidneys are playing a role. Indirect mechanism is going to involve a very prominent system that we call the RAS system, or the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So this system you are going to see over and over and over again in A&P2, and I've heard that it's been at least one, if not two questions on the TEAS exam as well. So I would make sure you really understand this, because again, you're going to see it at least 3 or 4 more times just in A&P2 itself. So when the blood pressure drops, the kidneys are going to release an enzyme called renin. And renin is going to start a cascade. So renin converts angiotensinogen, which is being released from the liver, into angiotensin 1. And then we have another enzyme coming in called angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE, that's being released from the lungs that's going to convert angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. So the whole purpose of this RAS system, or the cascade, is to produce angiotensin 2 because it does so many different things. So I'm going to show you this down here. We can see angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 here. This right here is what we consider collectively the RAS system, which is the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system here. Okay, so again, we have created this cascade, and they all converge at the production of angiotensin 2. So angiotensin 2 can go on to do 4 different things that are really important, one of which is to stimulate aldosterone to help make the kidneys reabsorb sodium. It's also going to help directly raise the blood pressure and trigger ADH to keep water and retain water within the body. It can even act at your hypothalamus, your thirst center, to make you feel thirsty, to cause you to drink more water. Regardless, all the things that it's going to do are really going to help raise your blood pressure back to its normal range. So again, this is just a summary of why it's so important that we have blood pressure regulation, that we don't have it too high and we don't have it too low. If your pressure is too low, the brain and other organs are not getting enough blood, which can lead to fainting or even a stroke or something like that. So it's really important that we are using all of our resources in our body, short-term regulation, long-term regulation, to maintain a consistent blood pressure.